Welcome to this event, Gender and Genocide. I'm Karen Wells, I'm the director of the Birkbeck Institute for Social Research, BISR, which supports and amplifies social research at Birkbeck, focusing on interdisciplinary, innovative research that aims to describe and explain social inequalities, their impact on people's lives, and the scope to challenge and mitigate them. We also hold events related to inequalities that are of pressing concern to the public in our seminar series, Social Research for the Public Good, which is what is hosting this event under the banner of Except Palestine. I can think of few issues of more pressing concern right now than the genocide of Palestinians being enacted by Israel in Gaza and the escalation of settler violence in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. I'm therefore very pleased that BISR can host and support this event, and my thanks to my colleague, Kalpana Wilson, for proposing and organising it and inviting the speakers and reaching out to Except Palestine to have this included in that series. Kalpana's chairing the event, and I will leave it to her to introduce the speakers. Thank you.
So thanks, Karen, and welcome everyone to this symposium on gender and genocide, amplifying voices from Gaza and building anti-colonial feminist solidarities. Before we start, I should let everyone know that we are going to be recording the event, but we won't be showing the audience in the recording. So even if you participate in the Q&A, which I very much hope that you will, it doesn't mean that your faces are going to be shown. Now, this event is taking place, as you know, as part of the Except Palestine series. So before we start, I'm going to just read a short statement which explains the thinking behind the series. So Except Palestine is a series of town halls taking place at universities across the UK. Its purpose is to emphasize, think through, and reject the exceptionalization of Palestine. It refuses the silencing, intimidation, and Kafkaesque framing of Palestine's ongoing Nakbas. The purpose of Except Palestine is also to emphasize the undeniable fact that there is something unique about Palestine, about the way it is systemically excised from our classrooms, our universities, and our public debate, because it's categorically labeled as criminal and terroristic politics and speech. And it is to think about how attempts to remove Palestine and Palestinians as a land, a people, and a politics tells us something about our shared condition. The particular censoring of Palestine tells us that there is something paradigmatic about Palestine. The uniqueness of how Palestine is treated tells us that Palestine is a universal, that tells us about all of our worlds, there and here and everywhere else. Except Palestine has now been held in 6 different universities. This is the 6th at Birkbeck. Each session focuses on a slightly different theme. In today's session, which is incidentally happening in International Women's Week, we will focus on the theme of gender and genocide. We'll be listening to and amplifying voices from Gaza and building anti-colonial feminist solidarities with Palestine. And we invite all of you to take Except Palestine elsewhere, to other universities, other spaces, to refuse the exceptionalization of Palestine. We need Palestine more than Palestine needs us, because the liberation of Palestine there and here is tied to the liberation of us all. Now, today's event is a collaboration, as you've heard, between the Birkbeck Institute of Social Research and the Institute for Women's Studies in Birzeit, occupied Palestine. And we are very honored to be able to welcome this panel of feminist scholars, speaking directly from the West Bank, as well as those here with us in London. Personally, I've been hoping to be involved in this kind of collaboration since I had the opportunity of visiting the Birzeit Institute of Women's Studies last year to take part in its annual conference and had the opportunity of engaging with the deeply inspiring and important feminist work which is taking place there. Although, of course, we never thought then that this would ultimately happen during a new genocidal onslaught by Israel on the Palestinian people. So we'll hear today about the history of women's experiences of displacement in Gaza, the politics of gender in representations of the genocide, and about Israel's weaponization of women's rights to delegitimize anti-colonial resistance, while specifically drawing from the experiences and articulations of women from Gaza. We'll also be discussing how the imperial colonial feminism, which is mobilized by Israel and its allies, including, of course, the British government, can be countered. And of course, this is certainly not the only kind of feminism. And part of what colonial feminist discourses do is to deny the existence of other feminisms, of anti-imperialist feminisms grounded in the experiences of the oppressed. So part of what we're seeking to do today is to recognize these other feminisms, and we'll be discussing what we need to do to effectively try to build anti-colonial feminist solidarities with Palestine and with the Palestinian people. So I'm not going to go on speaking any longer because I'm sure you're eager to hear from our speakers. And our first speaker today is Dr. Rema Hamami from Birzeit. She's a founding member of the Institute of Women's Studies at Birzeit University, where she's an associate professor of anthropology and currently directs the university's PhD program in interdisciplinary social sciences. She's founder and former chair of the university's Right to Education campaign and co-founder and former director of the Women's Affairs Center in Gaza. And there's much more that I could say about her work, but I'm just going to, in the interests of brevity, mention her most recent publication, which is the edited book, The Cunning of Gender Violence, Feminism and Geopolitics, published by Duke University Press in 2023, which is co-edited with Laila Abulugod and Nadira Shalhoub Kevorkian. Her chapter in the collection is entitled Catastrophic Aid, GBV Humanitarianism in Gaza. So I'm going to hand over now to Rema. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kalpana, and the others there at the Birkbeck Institute for Social Research for organizing this event today. I had a very difficult time deciding which way to go in trying to talk about the enormity of what's going on within 12 minutes. So I've taken a historical tack. I want to start today with the words of Subhi Ramadan, originally from the village of Hamama, who became a refugee in Gaza. And it's about her experience of the Nakba of 1948. This is from an interview I did with her in Shati refugee camp, now almost 3 decades ago. They, she means the Israelis, kept making attacks. We'd go into the fields and find them there. They'd come and shoot at us, shoot at all people, not just young men. The young men would fight back, attack their convoys. They'd come and kill 2 or 3 young men. The planes would come and bomb the houses. People would flee from the village out to the fields under the cactus and the olives. We'd stay there all night in the dark, and in the morning start going back home. We wouldn't dare until it was light. But then the attacks would start again, shooting. People would get killed. The planes would come and bomb again. We'd flee back to the fields under the olives and grapevines. We'd grab the kids and hold them tight and sit. No food, no water. The whole village together. Then after some time, people started to come from other villages, all fleeing to us. All of them in the fields under the olive and fig trees, all of them sitting there with their families. Then the planes came and started bombing us out in the fields. One day you're making bread, and the next day there's killing and bombing. We all fled towards the sea. The Mukhtar, the village headman, comes and says we should all go back towards the village. He puts a white flag on a pole and starts walking towards the trenches where the Jews are, and they shoot him. He's carrying a white shawl on a pole, and they shoot him. We surrendered, and they shot him. The Egyptian army came. They started telling us to flee. People started leaving from the sea on small fishing boats. Me and my family, we left by donkey. Me and my kids, we put the kids in the saddlebags on that donkey, and we head towards Gaza. Her husband had been shot 2 days before by Zionist forces as he was guarding their peanut field. I had just had my son a week before, and my relatives found my husband and brought me his body. They carried him back on a camel. I was young, with 6 children, 3 girls and 3 boys. I left with my parents and sisters carrying those kids on that donkey to Gaza. We left everything behind: cheese and clothes and grains and chickens. We got to the seashore of Gaza, and we were there 3 days, and then the planes came again and started bombing people on the beach. So again, we fled. We walked all the way until Khan Yunis because the planes were bombing people. We made a shelter on the beach there in Khan Yunis with sticks and bags and whatever we could find. Not just us, everyone. Every shelter had 6 families in them. Each one had their corner. Then they, and she means the Quakers, started distributing rations. And we'd walk 2 hours from the beach to Khan Yunis and carry that bag on our head and beg for some wood so we could cook. We'd be making bread and it was raining. One day I was at the ration station getting the rations, and the planes came and started bombing right into the crowd. People tried to run wherever they could. Someone lost their hand, another their leg. People were killed. Suddenly there's a fire in my face and hair is burnt. They thought I was dead. It took me a year to recover. We lived there on the beach in Khan Yunis for 3 years, not just us, all of my village was there living in the dunes. After some time, they gave us a tent. This was after the shack had collapsed on us from the rain. Inside the shack, we slept on the sand and made pillars from guava leaves. Then when it rained, the water would come up through the sand and soak everything. Then it rained so hard the shack collapsed. Then they started to make the camps, and people went north to live in the camps. And we came here to Shati camp because all of our relatives were here. There are so many obvious parallels in Subhi's description of events and experience of the 1948 Nakba and its aftermath with what's going on now that I'm going to assume I don't need to point them out to you. I'm centering Subhi's experience of the Nakba in this talk about the current Israeli genocide in Gaza, because that foundational experience is not past history nor a past event. It is a living memory and an inherited collective memory and trauma for Palestinians everywhere, but now most viscerally and immediately so for Palestinians in Gaza. But what we don't always realize is that Nakba memory is also a form of knowledge, of emotional knowledge, intimately carried by individuals in various versions over generations. In the current context of Gaza, that emotional knowledge of the Nakba now translates into a much more immediate and terrifying realization of, we know what they did in 1948, and so we know what they are capable of now. So along with the actual everyday unspeakable horrors of relentless bombing, infinite deaths and injuries, lack of safety, food, water, medicine, is the intense fear and foreboding created by this knowledge, both before it happens again and while it is already happening again. And it is this knowledge from narratives like that of Subhi about what they did in 1948 It also lays bare the delusional rhetoric of Western governments and media that cling to the idea that what is happening in Gaza now is solely an Israeli military operation aimed at eradicating Hamas. When 70% of family homes have been destroyed or made unlivable, when the whole fabric of society is decimated through the bombing of its schools, hospitals and clinics, places of worship, libraries, playgrounds, every single one of its 12 universities, when more than 30,000, more than 1.5% of its population is killed, and as we all know, the majority of whom are women or children, and alongside this, more than 75,000 of its population are suffering from devastating lifelong injuries. We are clearly no longer in the realm of what Biden called indiscriminate bombing or over-the-top levels of collateral damage. Instead, we are in the territory of a 21st century of violent ethnic cleansing, a modern-day repeat of the 1948 ethnic cleansing of Palestine. But let's return to Sophie and that first generation of refugees in Gaza. As we saw in her narrative, she, the surviving members of her family and of her village, were first forcibly displaced to North Gaza, and then through aerial bombardment by the Israeli Air Force, were forced further south to Khan Yunis. And even there, they were not safe. After living in a makeshift shack on the beach for almost 3 years that flooded, then finally collapsed from the rain, they were given a tent. And then finally, they were allocated a more permanent one in the newly created refugee camps that were made for more than the 200,000 refugees who ended up in Gaza in 48. And she and her family found their home in beach camp by the shore of Gaza City. I want to show you some images now. Kilpana, if you could show the first image.
Yeah, it's showing now.
So here's an image from the founding of Shati Camp in 1949, sorry. Its original inhabitants were about 23,000 refugees. This was its first girls' school. Slide 2, Kilpana, please. Between 1949 and now, destitute refugees like Supri and her family rebuilt their lives and communities from nothing. In her words, we left everything behind. They went on to marry, to educate their children, found myriad ways, especially the women, to string together a modest living despite decades of underdevelopment, enforced de-development, then economic blockade. Their children and grandchildren went on to become writers, teachers, filmmakers, soccer players, fighters, political leaders, and also just regular people with regular dreams. Slide 3, please. Over time, they built and extended their homes. This is the 1950s, when their tents were replaced with zinc-roofed shacks, many of them built by women like Sabhi and Shati, who labored to build these homes in the UNRWA Makes Work program of the time. Slide 4. And they kept finding ways to move forward, so that by the mid-1960s, this is what Shati Camp looked like. And in the first few years of the Israeli occupation, specifically in 1971, the Israeli General Ariel Sharon bulldozed more than 200 of these homes in Shati, a total of 2,000 camp homes across the Gaza Strip, so that they could be better patrolled by IDF tanks. At the time, 16,000 people lost their homes. Slide 5, please. And you can see the effects of those demolitions in this picture from the 1980s. And this is the image of Shati that I know from my time I spent there doing my dissertation research. Slide 6. These are schoolgirls from Shati camp in the 1980s. After Oslo, Shati camp residents were finally able to expand their homes upward. Israel had made it illegal until the Oslo Accords, and many families found ways to piece the money together to replace their UNRWA one-story homes with multi-story buildings to provide housing for their children and future generations. Slide 7. This is how Shati looked on the eve of this war. The image is from 2017. All of this was a constant struggle over generations to rebuild lives, homes, and communities that was accomplished despite enormous obstacles, the most recent of which was 15 years of blockade, siege, and sanctions, interspersed with multiple Israeli wars and invasions before this most recent one. Slide 8, please. On November 2nd of this war on Gaza, the IDF dropped leaflets on Shati, telling its inhabitants to flee south of Wadi Gaza. Slide 9. This is an image from that day. And over the first 2 weeks of November, Shati was targeted with intense air, land, and sea bombardment. By November 13th, this is how Shati was described by a foreign reporter who went there embedded with the Israeli military. A once cramped refugee camp in northern Gaza, none of its 90,000 residents were there. Many of the camp's dense apartment buildings had been destroyed, others were badly damaged. Armored columns of the IDF had torn up roads, electricity, water, sewage, infrastructure no longer exist. This situation is similar in much of Gaza City and outlying towns. Like much of northern Gaza, this is what Shati refugee camp looks like now. Slide 10, please. And slide 11, an aerial view. I want to end with the words of one of Shati camp's most well-known sons, the writer and filmmaker Abu Ali Yassin. And this is what he wrote on his Facebook page a few weeks ago. 2 days and we will be back. 2 days and we will return. This is exactly what I said to my family when I left our house in Shati as a refugee to Deir el-Bala on Friday, October 15th. And that sentence is precisely what my grandfather, Haj Baris, said to his children and my parents when they fled from our original town in Damra in 1948. My father and mother kept repeating that phrase for more than 60 years until they passed away. My father kept telling me about the sycamore tree planted in the courtyard of their house in Damra and how delicious its taste was. There was nothing as sweet as its fruit. My mother kept remembering the town, every corner, street, house, and family, and how she hid the precious things under the sycamore tree until she could go retrieve them on the day of her return. Now, we have been displaced for 109 days in Deir el-Bala. In the first days, our first concern was to save ourselves from the scourge of war, trying hard to stay away from the sites of bombing and fighting. Now, after months, we began to dream of returning and began remembering every detail of the house, inch by inch, piece by piece. We returned to the pictures of our house on our mobile phone. We zoom in until we see the fine details of the kitchen and a random image of the bedroom, and our bed that we used to sleep on. We now realize the meaning of a person resting on his pillow and his bed. 2 days and we will return. The days of the war have been long and we are only dreaming of returning home and following the news of the truce in its details every day and its never-ending failure. For the displaced, the truce means returning to their homes. Even if we die there, we will die happy. 2 days and we will be back. When my father was telling me that sentence, I was asking myself, were they so foolish? Didn't they realize that it was an occupation, that it was a war, and that the return would take a long time? Have we fallen into the same trap? Or will we soon return to our homes? The important question is, are the houses still standing, and is the city still there? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rima, for that extremely powerful and moving talk. I'm going to turn now to Oruba A. Othman. Oruba is a PhD candidate in the Interdisciplinary Social Sciences program at Birzeit and a lecturer in the Social Sciences Department at Bethlehem University. Her thesis is titled Dynamics of Hope in the Everyday Society of Pain in the Gaza Strip, Multiple Futurities and Temporalities. Oruba will speak in Arabic and her talk will be translated by Aya Jayusi. So I'd like to also thank Aya for joining us today and doing this vital work of translating. Thank you, Oruba.
شكرا جزيلا طبعا على الاستضافة. سأتحدث بشكل أساسي حول موضوع جنسنة الإبادة وتوظيف الأجندة النسائية أو حقوق النساء شرعا تحرب الإبادة، من ثم التحدث حول كيف لنا أن نصوغ نسوية أكثر جذرية في دعم مستقبل سياسي لفلسطين تحديدا قطاع.
Hello everyone. I'm having a problem with the camera, so I'll just translate using the audio. My talk will be about gendering genocide and the weaponization of feminist agenda in eliminating the political future of Gaza.
طبعا يعني كنا لاحظنا في بداية الحرب المزاعم التي انتشرت في الإعلام الغربي والإسرائيلي حول الاعتداء الجنسي من قبل بين قوسين طبعا المقاومة الفلسطينية في 7 أكتوبر. كانت هذه المزاعم بشكل أساسي مبنية على البروباغندا الإسرائيلية، لكن تم تبنيها من قبل الإعلام الغربي، وكان لها دور أساسي في شرعنة حرب الإبادة وفي التمادي الآلة الإسرائيلية في ممارسة العنف الجنساني ليس فقط بحق النساء إنما كذلك بحق الرجال الفلسطينيين الذين تم اعتقالهم والتنكيل بهم من قطاع.
So we've all read the lies spread by Zionists about sexual violence that was committed by the resistance on the 7th of October. These lies mainly were a way to legitimize the genocide and the violence in Gaza. This propaganda was spread by Israel and Zionists, but was also adopted by Western media, and it legitimized the genocide happening in Gaza right now. Legitimizing the sexual violence committed against not only women in Gaza, but also the men in Gaza who were publicly humiliated, stripped, and rounded up.
طبعا لا يمكن قراءة هذه المزاعم بمعزل عن السياق التاريخي الأكبر للاستعمار، والذي دوما يتعامل مع الرجل الأسود المستعمر الأصلاني باعتباره رجلا شهوانيا يفترس ما بين قوسين النساء البيض أو النساء المستوطنات الحسنوات، ويتم التعامل معه باعتباره حيوان بشري مفترس. وبالتالي هناك استحقاق على العالم المتحضر ما بين قوسين تمثل إسرائيل بإزالة هذا الخطر من العالم.
We can't read these lies, we can't read these allegations without understanding the historical context of colonialism that portrays Black men, that portrays Native men, indigenous men as animals that are governed by their lust and base instincts, and that prey on white women. And so this animal, this human animal, becomes a reason why the Western world, represented by Israel, feels that it has the right to protect women from this sexual, violent animal.
طبعا هنا المفارقة بأنه يعني إسرائيل نشرت مثل هذه اللي هو عندنا الدعايات، وحتى لم فقط تتلقفها الإعلام الغربي، حتى كذلك الأصوات النسوية الليبرالية دعمت مثل هذه التوجهات، والتي كان لها رابط حقيقي وسببي ما بين هذه المزاعم وبين الاعتداءات الجنسية اللي تمت بحق الأسيرات، تم التنكيل بهم وتم تهديدهم بالاغتصاب أو تم اغتصابهم، وحتى كذلك الرجال الذين تم شحنهم في الشاحنات وتم تعريتهم بشكل شبه كامل وإذلال. المفارقة هنا بأنه
what we see here, what we can notice here is that Israel spread those allegations in the Western media, and that not only Zionists and Israeli media spread this propaganda, but also liberal feminists also spread and disseminated these narratives, false narratives and allegations. And the funny thing is that these allegations themselves were happened and were happened to Palestinian women who were detained from Gaza and who were threatened with rape or were actually raped in Israeli prisons. And not only the women themselves, but also the men who were rounded up, stripped to their underwear, publicly humiliated, as we saw in the photos. So they were stripped publicly to their underwear.
طبعا كما قلت من المفارقة أنه بالمقابل إسرائيل تتعامل مع اغتصاب النساء الفلسطينيات باعتباره استحقاقا، يعني باعتبار أنه هؤلاء النساء المستعمرات أجسادهن قابلة للانتهاك، أجسادهن ملوثة، وبالتالي هناك استحقاق ما من قبل المستعمر أو الرجل الأبيض المتفوق بأنه يقوم بالاعتداء على يعني النساء الفلسطينيات. وهنا لا يمكن لنا أن نرى بأنه سياسة الاغتصاب أو التهديد بالاغتصاب اللي تم العمل بها في الحرب بمعزل عن النظر إلى سياسة الاغتصاب باعتبارها حجر أساس في البنية الأساسية التي بنيت عليها هذه الدولة، وكان الاغتصاب يعتبر سلاح أساسي في طرد الفلسطينيين وتهجيرهم في عام 1948 مثل ما حصل في مجزرة دير ياسين أو قرى أخرى.
The paradox is that the rape and the sexual violence committed against Palestinian women, there is a feeling of entitlement to the bodies of Palestinian women, that they are dirty, that they are easy prey, and that it's the right of the state, this state, the Zionist state, to violate. And the policy of rape is not isolated. It's not an isolated incident. It's the building block, and it's actually interwoven into the foundations of the Zionist state. And because in 1948, this policy of threatening with sexual violence and rape was propagated and was one of the tools to drive and displace Palestinians out of the villages, like what happened in the massacre of Deir Yassin.
لكن طبعا المختلف هذه المرة الذي يمكن أن نلحظه بأنه هذا العنف المادي بيلاحقه عنف رقمي، بمعنى في 48 هذه المجازر أو هذه الجرائم تم ربما تخبئتها في الأرشيفات، وبعد سنوات طويلة تم الإفراج عنها. لكن اليوم نلاحظ بأنه في هناك يعني تبجح في إعلان مثل هذه الجرائم من خلال استخدام وسائل التكنولوجيا، منصات التيك توك والإنستغرام، نشر مقاطع مثلا جنود إسرائيليون يرتدون ملابس داخلية للنساء تم تهجيرهم من منازلهم، مقاطع أيضا كذلك أخرى لمجندات وجنود يشعرون بأنه تفجيرهم وتفخيخهم الكثيف للمنازل يعادل القذف الجنسي وما يشبه المتعة الجنسية. فهذا يمكن نحكي أنه في هناك خيالات جنسية يتم نشرها من خلال يعني الإبادة.
What's different this time is that in addition to physical violence, like what happened in 1948, there's also a new type, a new form of violence, which is digital violence. We can see because in the past, these acts were hidden away until they were talked about later. So they were archived, they were covered up. But now there's publicity. These acts are being published on social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, where we saw Israeli occupation soldiers wearing lingerie and the underwear of displaced Palestinian women or martyred Palestinian women, and posting these videos and these photos on the internet. We also see the almost sexual pleasure they derive from blowing up the houses of Palestinians in Gaza, which is almost like sexual pleasure for them, which indicates also sexual imaginings when they do these acts.
كمان من المهم انه يعني تركيزنا على النساء لا يعني اننا نطبق العنف الممارس، العنف البنيوي الجنساني بحق الرجال الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة. هناك عنف منظم ومنهجي ضدهم، ومحاولة لنزع فكرة الذكورة او نزع فكرة الرجولة عن الرجال الفلسطينيين. نلاحظ بانه كان في هناك مقاطع فيديو نشروها الجنود انفسهم لمحاولة الانتقاص من رجولة الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة، وهم معرون بشكل شبه كامل وموضوعون في حفرات عميقة. جزء منهم تم الإفراج عنهم بعد ذلك بعد تعذيب كبير على أجسادهم، ومنهم من يعني تم وضع التراب والرمال فوقهم وتم دفنهم وهم أحياء.
Us talking about the sexual violence committed against Palestinian women in Gaza doesn't mean that we're normalizing the sexual violence committed against Palestinian men, the systemic violence committed against Palestinian men. There is an attempt to emasculate Palestinian men through the videos and the pictures that Israeli soldiers share on social media, which largely try to emasculate and strip Palestinian men from, strip the image of masculinity from Palestinian men. So we see photos of them being stripped naked, put in deep holes. Some of them were released after being tortured, but some of them were also buried alive.
طبعا هذا التطبيع للعنف بحق الرجال ما تحاول يعني بعض التيارات النسوية فعله هو بشكل أساسي يهدف إلى نزع الشرعية عن النضال الفلسطيني. كون المقاومة الفلسطينية في قطاع غزة هي مبنية بشكل أساسي، نحكي المقاومة المسلحة مبنية على يعني الرجال. فجزء أساسي من نشر هذه الادعاءات هي ليس فقط لشرعنة الإبادة، إنما أيضا كذلك لنزع الشرعية عن النضال الفلسطيني، والتعامل بأن هذا النضال هو ليس نضالا بقدر ما هو يعني يتم وصمهم بالإرهاب. وهنا وصم الإرهاب لا يهدف فقط لوصم الرجال، إنما حتى كذلك وصم المجتمع بأسره، بكون هؤلاء الرجال هم يعني تم إنجابهم من أرحام النساء، وهؤلاء الرجال كذلك هم سيكونون آباء مستقبليين لأطفال يتم نزع الطفلنة عنهم ويتم نزع الصفة المدنية عنهم. فبالتالي يتم التعامل هنا بأنهم جميع من في غزة هم إرهابيون بالفطرة، وكأنه في هناك نوع من يعني عرقنة يعني البعد الإرهابي في غزة وعدم التعامل معه باعتباره سلوكا بقدر ما التعامل معه باعتباره شيء متجذر في البنية الغزية.
This normalization of violence, there is a reason behind it. And the main reason is that Israel is trying to delegitimize Palestinian resistance and because especially armed Palestinian resistance, because most of the Palestinian freedom fighters are men. And this is a way to legitimize the genocide happening right now and to, again, delegitimize the right of Palestinians to self-protection and resistance, and also to label these acts of resistance as terrorism. And this is not only applied to the men of Gaza, but also society at large, Palestinian society, because these men are the sons of Palestinian women, and they were born out of Palestinian women. And they are the fathers to Palestinian children whose childhood is being denied and are all being labeled as terrorists. And terrorism itself is being racialized as part of Palestinian society and upbringing, and not just a practice, but something that is deeply rooted and embedded in Palestinian society.
طبعا يعني وسط كل هذا رأينا بأنه تقرير الأمم المتحدة الخاص بحقوق يعني النساء تبنى في البداية مثل هذه يعني المزاعم، وفيما بعد فترة طويلة جدا نشر تقرير آخر الذي يوضح فيه أن هناك على الأقل شهادتين على الأقل من نساء توضح بأنه تم اغتصابهن. وهنا كانت الإشكالية بأنه مثل هذه النسوية الليبرالية تتعامل مع الطرفين الفلسطيني والإسرائيلي باعتبارهم طرفين متساويين في الصراع، وليس باعتبارهما قوتين غير متكافئتين، باعتبار هناك جهة تمثل المستعمر وجهة أخرى تمثل المستعمر. وبالتالي لا يمكن التعامل مع العنف الممارس بحق النساء باعتباره عنف واحد، باعتبارهم كل الضحايا ضحايا متجانسة، وكأنه في هنا إزاحة لمركبات مختلفة من العرق، من الطبقة، من القومية، من السياق الاجتماعي والسياق الاستعماري وغيرها من هذه يعني العناصر.
And we saw that the report by the United Nations at first adopted these allegations, but then after a long time, only recently published two testimonies, at least by Palestinian women who were detained from Gaza about being raped in Israeli prisons. The pitfall here is that liberal feminism sees the Palestinians and Israelis as two equal sides, when in reality there is no equality between these two sides. One of them is the colonizer, and the other is a colonized, and we cannot treat the violence that is committed by Israel and the violence that that it's alleged that was propagated by Palestinian resistance as one type of violence that is the same, and that all victims are the same, because this means that we disregard aspects of race, class, nationalism, and also the colonization.
يعني وكأن هذا الاتجاه من الاتجاهات النسوية الليبرالية البيضاء تحاول أن تقول لنا بأنه الأختية واجبة هنا، وبأنه يمكن بناء مستقبل سياسي مشترك ما بين النساء الفلسطينيات والنساء الإسرائيليات باعتبارهن ضحايا للعنف المبني على النوع الاجتماعي. هذا طبعا كله مؤذي بحق يعني النساء الفلسطينيات وبحق السردية الفلسطينية، لأنه جزء من هذه المنظومة تمثلها النساء الإسرائيليات الذين يتمتعن بامتيازات عدة مبنية على سلبي أنا كعروبة كلاجئة فلسطينية من زرنوقة، سلبي أرضي، وأيضا كذلك تدمير حتى منزلي في هذه الحرب، وأيضا يعني فقدان 9 من أفراد العائلة. فلا يمكن فعليا التعامل بأنه هناك يمكن بناء مستقبل مشترك ما بينهم وعزل السياق السياسي الأكبر.
What white feminism, white liberal feminism tries to do is to say that sisterhood is a must between Palestinian and Israeli women because they have a shared political future, and they are also victims of the same kind of violence, the same kind of gender-based violence. And this is a harmful narrative to spread because this narrative ignores the violence committed by Israeli women who are part of the Zionist machine that suppresses and oppresses Palestinian women. So, for example, Uruba, who lost her home, who lost her land, and 9 members of her family, cannot really see a common future with Israeli women, with ignoring the political context and everything that happened.
يعني من أجل هذا كله كنت أفكر في كيف لنا أن نحاول أن نصوغ يعني اتجاه نسوي أكثر جذري فيما يتعلق اليوم في قطاع غزة، وأرى بأنه لم يعد من الكافي فقط أن ننطلق من مصطلحات التقاطعية ومصطلحات العنف المركب ومصطلحات التحرر، لأنه استخدام هذه المصطلحات بدون فهم ديناميكيات الحياة اليومية التي يعيشها الفلسطينيون والفلسطينيون في قطاع غزة تبدو وكأنه هذه المفاهيم هي مفاهيم جاهزة وتعبر عن سياق قطاع غزة باعتباره موقع ثابت، موقع لا تاريخي.
So I've been thinking about how to formulate a new feminism that is a new radical feminism because it's no longer enough for us to take the ready-made concepts of intersectionality, and ignore the dynamics of daily life and the daily suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, because these are ready-made concepts that we cannot apply to what is happening right now in Gaza.
يعني من أجل هذا كله أنا صراحة من واقع كمان شغلي في الأطروحة اللي سأعكسه في كيف لي أن أفكر كيف يمكن أن تكون النسوية مساعدة على الأقل للنساء في قطاع غزة وتدعو إلى وقف الإبادة وكسر الحصار، بأنه ننطلق من مفهوم الألم ليس فقط طبعا باعتباره الألم الكلينيكي أو الألم الجسدي الذي يمكن تشخيصه، إنما هذا الألم الاجتماعي الممتد والألم النفسي غير المرئي الغائر في نفوس الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة. وبالتالي أنا أرى بأنه النسوية الحقة هي لا تسعى إلى تفريغ هذا الألم وإلى معالجته ضمن أطر نفسية غربية مرتبطة فيما بعد الصدمة، لأنه ألمنا هو ألم تاريخي، هو ألم مستمر، ويجب أن نتعامل مع الألم باعتباره قيمة تتراكم وقيمة تتصاعد عبر السنوات وعبر الأجيال.
And for this, I've been thinking about, and as part of her work, her dissertation, how can feminism help the women in Gaza? How can feminism help stop the genocide and also break the siege on Gaza? And for this, we have to start from the concept of pain, not only physical pain, but also social and psychological pain that is invisible, unseen, and the kind of pain that cannot really be understood through the paradigms of Western psychology by talking about post-trauma, because this type of pain is a historical pain that is still ongoing, that has not stopped, and that keeps on accumulating as the days go by.
لأنه هذا الألم طبعا هو مرتبط بفكرة النكبة المستمرة، واليوم الإبادة لا يمكن قراءتها بمعزل عن سياسات التطهير العرقي والنكبة من 48 لليوم تهدف الأساسي إلى الاستحواذ على الأرض. وبالتالي يجب الانطلاق كما قلت من ممارسات الحياة اليومية ومن الألم اليومي الذي تعانيه النساء في قطاع غزة، بمعنى أن نقرأ المرأة الفلسطينية التي فقدت منذ يومين توأمها الذين ولدا في الحرب، وكانت تنتظرهم ل11 عاما، فقدت التوأم وفقدت كذلك الوالد. علينا كذلك أن نقرأ هذا الألم من منظور امرأة أخرى قطعت مسافات طويلة من أجل أن تنتشل ابنها الذي خافت عليه أن تتحلل جثمانه، فتحت زخات الرصاص وتحت خطر القنص من قبل القناص الإسرائيلي قامت بسحب جثمان ابنها.
Because this type of pain is linked to the continuous Nakba of Palestinians and the policies of genocide and displacement since 1948 to this day, and the attempts to seize land, Palestinian land. So we have to examine, we have to read this type of daily pain. We have to take a look at the women in Gaza, like the woman who just who lost her twins. Who lost her twins recently, who were born during the war, and she's been waiting for them, she's been getting fertility treatments for 11 years, and she lost them both along with their father, her husband. We have to read this. We have to read this from the perspective and the point of view of the woman who has traveled long miles to get to the body of her son, to try and retrieve it from beneath the rubble because she was afraid that it would decompose. So despite the danger, despite the snipers, she went there and she retrieved the body of her son.
أيضا كذلك يعني أفكر في أنه علينا أن لا نختزل فقط النساء كذلك بكونهن ضحايا، كذلك بكونهن مقاومات، بكونهن قادرات على خلق أشكال من التفاوض وأشكال من التحايل للعيش وللاستمرار في حاضر الإبادة وحاضر اللايقين المستمر. فمثلا لدينا نساء فلسطينيات كذلك يجبن الأراضي في رفح وفي حتى بيت لاهيا، ويقطعن الكيلومترات العدة فقط لإيجاد الخبيز والأعشاب البرية التي يستطيعن فيها إطعام أطفالهم الجوعى. وهنا كذلك النساء تضحي بصحتهن وتضحي بأمنهن الغذائي لصالح الأطفال. فلدينا كثير أشكال من قدرة النساء على الصمود، قدرتهن على التكيف، قدرتهن على تغيير الحاضر. وأقصد هنا بأنه الألم هذا يجب ألا نفرغه. أي نسوية حقه يجب أن تشحن نفسها بمثل هذا الألم وأن تعبئ يعني نفسها بمثل هذا الألم، لأنه جزء أساسي من قدرتنا على تخيل المستقبل هو الانطلاق من هذا الألم والانطلاق من هذه المعاناة التي نرى بأنه إذا شحنا أنفسنا بها جماعيا وأدركنا هذا الألم بشكل جماعي تصبح لدينا حافز للانطلاق من مستقبل مختلف يتحدى الأنظمة الفاشية والاستعمارية والرأسمالية.
We also need to make sure that we don't see Palestinian women as just victims. We also have to see them as the fighters and as the fighters they are, the freedom fighters they are, because we see Palestinian women in Gaza, in Rafah, in Beit Lahia, roaming around, trying to find food, trying to find food to feed their kids, sacrificing themselves, sacrificing their share of food so that their children, their kids could eat. And so we have to acknowledge this ability of Palestinian women for steadfastness and to persevere and to change the present and the future. The important thing is that we do not think of this pain as meaningless, that we do not deprive it of meaning, because this pain is the way that we can use it to mobilize ourselves. We can use it as part of our ability to imagine better and different futures, and it's our starting point to use this pain to make a better future for Palestinian women and women in general.
يعني لابد من الإشارة قبل يعني الختام بأنه تحديداً ما صنع 7 أكتوبر هو الألم. يعني المقاومين الفلسطينيون الذين عبروا إلى أراضينا المحتلة هم أعمارهم بين 18 إلى 25 سنة. جزء كبير منهم ولدوا في سنوات طويلة من الحصار، جزء منهم لم يرى الكهرباء ساعات منتظمة، جزء منهم لم يشرب مياه نظيفة، جزء كبير منهم وأنا منهم لم يعني أركب طائرة في حياتي، لم أسافر في حياتي. جزء منهم فقدوا أفراد من عائلتهم. الشعور اليومي بهذا الألم وبهذا المعاناة يرون بأنه جزء من استشفائهم هو أن يكون هذا الألم محرك مركزي في تشكيل خيالهم المستقبلي نحو الحرية. وبالتالي هنا المستقبل لا يكون هو فقط شيء نحو الهروب للأمام أو شيء يدفعنا للانتظار، بقدر ما هو يعطينا وكالة على كيفية تغيير الحاضر، على كيف أن نمارس في الحاضر. هذا هو ما جعلهم يخلقون إمكانيات من يعني العدم ويعبرون إلى المناطق المحتلة. وكما نلاحظ جزء كبير منهم هم أبناء اللاجئين الذين تم طردهم من هذه القرى التي تقع في حدود أو تقع في قطاع غزة. وهنا كأنه بدأ أن المستقبل الذي نراه بعيدا أو الأمل تجسد في الحاضر بشكل جلي.
And we have to note that October 7, what happened on October 7th was the reason behind what happened is pain. So most of the men who broke down the barrier and who broke the siege and went into the 1948 occupied territories were young men between the ages of 14 to 25. Most of them were born during the siege, the blockade on Gaza. None of them experienced electricity without cuts. None of them experienced drinkable water. Most of them, almost all of them, lost members of their family. And so this feeling, this daily feeling of pain, a way to find salvation, a way to let's say transcend this pain is to use it as an engine, as a way, as a driving force towards freedom. And it's not just about moving forward. The future is not just about moving forward. It's also about changing the present, to reclaim agency over the present, and creating something out of nothing. So they created, and this is what enabled them to break the siege, despite the advanced technology, despite their numbers, to be able to break the siege. And most of these men who broke these barriers are the sons of refugees, Palestinian refugees, who come from villages that were ethnically cleansed in 1948. And so hope becomes something that gives you agency to change your future, to change the present as well.
ما أريد فقط الاختتام فيه الآن القول بأنه لا مستقبل دون غزة ولا نضال نسوي دون غزة. وإحنا نلاحظ اليوم في أنه هناك صراع كبير على جغرافيا الأمل والمستقبل ما بين إسرائيل والمجتمعات المانحة وأمريكا من جهة والطرف الفلسطيني من جهة أخرى، وكل يحاول أن يصمم أو يريد أن يدير مستقبل آخر لفلسطين أو لقطاع غزة تحديدا يقصى منه الفلسطينيون في حقهم في تقرير المصير. وهذا ما أرى بأنه النسوية الحقة هي عليها أن تتحدى بأنه أي مستقبل لغزة يجب أن يكون الفلسطينيون من قطاع غزة هم القادرون على تحديده. بمعنى كل ملفات إعادة الإعمار الحديث عنها اليوم والحديث عن المجتمعات المانحة والحديث عن تدفق الأموال بعد انتهاء الحرب هو لا يهدف إلى خدمة احتياجات وتطلعات الفلسطينيين بقدر ما يحاول أن يعيد هيكلة وتشكيل العلاقات الاجتماعية والعلاقات الأمنية في المدينة بشكل يخدم المصالح الإسرائيلية، يحسن شروط الإبادة ويتبع عنف الحصار. آية عشان وبعدها آخر شيء بنحكي.
Yeah, so before we conclude, we have to say that there is no future without Gaza, and there is no resistance, there's no feminist struggle without Gaza. And this is what we see in this struggle between Israel, between the donor countries. Everyone's trying to steer, everyone's trying to take control of the future of the Gaza Strip. And to exclude the Palestinians from making these decisions, taking away their right for self-determination. And so this is what feminism has to fight against, what it has to defy. Any future is a future that that has to be the future that Palestinians decide on. And so all of this talk about rebuilding Gaza and pumping money into the Strip is not really about servicing the wants and needs and the hopes and aspirations of Palestinians. It's about reestablishing social relations and the paradigms that help Israel and help create the conditions necessary for genocide.
أخيرا يعني كل ما أريد قوله بأنه اليوم غزة هي الاختبار الحقيقي، لأنه السماح باستمرار الإبادة هو لا يعني فقط السماح بالنظام الاستعماري الصهيوني بالقتل في غزة، إنما هو أيضا كذلك يعطي دفعة قوية للأمام لكل الأنظمة والأيديولوجيات العنصرية والقمعية والفاشية، سواء كانت الموجودة أو حتى التي في طور الظهور والانبثاق، تسمح لها بالتقدم بالمضي قدما، تسمح لها بتطوير أدواتها وسياساتها وبتشبيك علاقاتها أكثر مع إسرائيل. وهذا يعني سيخلف ضحايا كثر من النساء ومن جميع الشعوب المقهورة في الجنوب العالمي. فاليوم إنهاء الإبادة وإنهاء النظام الاستعماري هو ليس فقط خدمة للشعب الفلسطيني، هو خدمة لكل شعوب الجنوب العالمي ولمنع تطور هذه الأنظمة والأيديولوجيات يعني العنصرية. من هنا أستغل الفرصة لأدعوكم باسم نساء غزة. نساء غزة قاموا بإصدار بيان نشرناه بلغات مختلفة بالعربية والإنجليزية والفرنسية والإسبانية والكورية، وهذا البيان بشكل أساسي هو يدعو لجعل الثامن من آذار، حراك الثامن من آذار، حراك تتمركز فيه الدعوة إلى وقف الإبادة وإلى كسر الحصار كي لا يتم السيطرة على الشوارع والاحتجاجات من قبل الأصوات النسوية يعني البيضاء الليبرالية التي تحاول أن تساوي ما بين يعني الطرفين. فأدعوكم جميعا أساتذة وطلاب إلى أن تتحدثوا عن نساء غزة، تتحدثوا عن شعب غزة، أن تنشروا قدر الإمكان، أن تنزلوا إلى الشوارع، أن تقاطعوا المصالح الأمريكية والبريطانية المتواطئة في منظومة الإبادة المستمرة من أجل حياة الفلسطينيين ومن أجل حياة الأطفال الذين يدفعون الثمن الأكبر من وراء هذه الإبادة اليوم. وشكرا.
And so to conclude, I would just like to say that Gaza is the real test now for all of us, because the continuation of the genocide and the continuation of the settler colonization and the Zionist occupation is not just about allowing the killing of Palestinians in Gaza to go on. It's also a push for all the fascist ideologies and governments that are in the world right now or that are emerging to be strengthened and to gain momentum. And so this will obviously allow them to have more tools in their arsenal to oppress more women, to oppress more people in the global south. And so the ending genocide in Gaza is not just a service, it's not just for the Palestinian people, it's also important for all the people living in the global south. And it's a way to stop these racist, fascist regimes from gaining a foothold. And so Ruba asks you and would like to and would like for you to share the statement that is shared by women in Gaza in multiple languages, so French, Korean, and English, and other languages, to make March 8th, and to use it as a way to call for the end of the genocide and for a ceasefire, and to break the siege and the blockade of Gaza, for you to take to the streets and to raise your voices and to fight against the liberal white voices that are equating Palestinians with Israelis and between the two sides. And so talk about the women of Gaza, go to the streets, publish and post about what's happening, and boycott all the companies, all the universities, and all the institutions that are in the service of US and UK institutions and organizations that back the genocide and the Zionist occupation, for the lives of Palestinians and the lives of Palestinian children who are most affected by what's going on in Gaza right now.
Thank you very much, Oruba, for that really important and thought-provoking talk. And just to add that we'll be sharing that link to the call for the strike from feminists in Gaza, for the strike on 8th March at the end of this session. And we'll also be sending it to all of you who signed up for this event. And thank you very much to Aya for that translation. So our next speaker is Dr. Rania Jawad. She's the current director of the Institute of Women's Studies and an assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature at Birzeit University. She's leading a working group at the Institute that critically engages with the praxis of collecting testimonials and writings by women from Gaza during the current genocidal violence. So over to you, Rania. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kalpana, for initiating the event and your work on putting it together, particularly in person. For my contribution, I want to speak to and draw on the record of the genocidal violence that is being written and imaged in live time as we speak by Palestinians in Gaza since October and before, since we know this moment to be an extension of Israel's genocidal war on the Palestinians across the land since its colonization. Described as a televised genocide, one that can be watched and listened to in real time, we see and hear the brutal violence Israel pounds onto Gaza through news outlets, through the rise of what we might call citizen journalists and community and individual social media platforms. The images, videos, voices are piercing, and the amount is massive. The destruction of people's pasts, present lives, and futures is as engineered and intentional as Israel's daily targeted murder of journalists, hospital workers, families, and children. Israeli representatives say again and again the aim is to destroy. What I want to speak briefly to is the incredible amounts of writing that women and men and youth from Gaza are producing, much of which is shared publicly. In other words, a piece of what those in Gaza produce amidst targeted, large-scale, horrifying practices to eliminate. Being made in real time and circulated through social media and limited news outlets, first-hand accounts and posts are comprised not only of experiences of the brutal bombardments, siege, and viciousness of the invading Israeli army, appeals to a world public to end the attacks, memorializing loved ones who have been martyred, and the desire not to be documented as a mere number of the dead or injured, but also attempts to find out where loved ones have been displaced, if they've been kidnapped by the Israeli army or martyred, vehement critiques of state, capitalist, and media complicity, and large and small-scale profiting from the war, comparisons to the ethnic cleansing practices of the Nakba years, political commentary, reflective prose, and what the materialities are of multiple forced displacements that include attempts to locate essential items such as vitamins for malnourished pregnant women and diapers for the young. And we have to note that displacement most often means being displaced 5, 6, 10 times and often more. In late October, early November, we began an initiative in the Institute of Women's Studies to collect and document testimonials, specifically by women from Gaza, who are survivors, we have to remember, of multiple Israeli bombing campaigns in just the past years. Drew from their writings on social media platforms, considering social media to have a finite life, as well as firsthand testimonials that were sent specifically to us. With the urgency of preserving their words came an ethics and politics of the work. And so here I want to pose some of the questions that we've been engaging with, and also acknowledge those working on the project with me, some of whom are on the panel as well. And so I want to pose some questions in terms of shifting the focus from a relationship to the images and voices we hear from Palestine, and particularly Gaza at this moment, as standing for evidence of the genocide or the details of ongoing settler colonial violence, to make that shift to focus on the life, the language, and the labor of those producing them. Or to put it another way, what does it mean to listen to women's articulations and their labors of doing so? How are we forced to account for our positionalities in the brutalities, and also to listen to the details they articulate, not as evidence or ethnographic data of colonial imperial violence, but as the reflection, conceptualization, analysis, and defiance that provides the language for our actions, thought, and mobilizations. I want to read excerpts from one woman's writings, Maryam al-Loh, a mother in Gaza who has 2 children and recently gave birth on January 15th to a baby girl she named Razan. In her first displacement from her home in Beit Lahia in the north, Maryam was near the end of her sixth month of pregnancy, and she gave birth to Razan in Rafah in the south. It's a quote. "I never imagined that my labor would be intense, being homeless with nothing but oppression, humiliation, and disappointment in our hearts. After more than 100 days of displacement, fatigue, and heavy days with the burden of pregnancy, the minimum of what can be said is that our souls have literally dissolved." On the 15th of January, in the Emirati Field Hospital in Rafah, where nearly 2/3 of the Gaza Strip residents were pushed, I was there among dozens of women who were experiencing labor pains. Waiting in a chair, as other women were, it took 2 hours for a bed to be available for me to go into labor, alone without any nurse or assistance. A blanket was not even available in the hospital. There was no communication to tell anyone about my needs, where I was, or even that I was going into labor. However, labor is a miracle with God's presence, protection, and care. After giving birth, there was no place for me to wait to receive post-labor care or even a blanket to protect myself from the extreme cold. I had a fever and was offered minimal medicine for pain and had to leave the hospital that night to return to the extreme cold of the tent. The next day, Maryam describes the children in Gaza as prisoners. "Our children are prisoners suffering in displacement camps," she writes. "Who will compensate our children for their deprivation, their days, their health, and the fear, terror, displacement, and helplessness they suffer every day? Who will compensate them for their lost education and future?" Maryam elsewhere described this as Israel's killing of motherhood. On the one hand, forced into malnourishment, where mothers who've given birth in Gaza are unable to produce enough milk for their newborns. On the other hand, it's the details of the war that kills us, she writes, 1,000,000 times more than the war itself, where one cannot provide food, water, protection to children. A little over a month after giving birth to Razan, Maryam shared with me an initiative she started for 40 children, ages 6 to 8, in the displacement camps, providing them with a notebook and a pencil to continue their schooling in some form. More than 200 children showed up, and with mutual aid support from the community, she is now overseeing a team of volunteer teachers to open up space for as many children as possible. I want to pause here and consider Maryam's words, not because they bring into form a notion of the human, or even the civilian to empathize with, or a universalist attempt to relate to her in order to right what has been wronged, or in her remarkable ability to provide such a space for over 200 homeless children that is oriented with a vision to the future. Rather, these details of life that are articulated are forms of living that the Zionist Project intentionally produces. But in reading, following, and living with the words so many women are writing to each other, for themselves, and to a collective public, we see in these records of life how they articulate and define what our survival looks like and means, in defiance of all complicit in their and our destruction. And I mean here defying not only erasure, but the forms of living imposed on us. And while I'm only spending a little bit time here to glimpse one woman's writings, the living record of women's lives, labors, and production of language is vast, dissonant, powerful, and piercing. Returning to the questions that I posed earlier on how we read and can be accountable to those articulating their survival, I want to pose the questions again in a slightly different form to come to a conclusion so that we have time also to hear discussion with those who are in person in the room. How do we refrain from using their words as expressing the details of colonial violence in order to consider and engage in all the ways possible with all the work that their testimonials, their writings do and can do? While here I've only had time more to pose some questions, I want to close with a few words in translation from another woman's writings that have resonance with Aruba's words, and I would say that challenge what words of pain and hope may sound like, and to consider what they have the potential to create. This is Birzeit Natil and a few of her words written 3 days ago, and we have to know 3 days ago marks about day 149 or 150 of this genocidal war. Birzeit wrote, "I shake my body from under the rubble of our city and put back together our homes in my imagination, like pieces of a puzzle, to feel some sense of reassurance. And I have no choice but to hope. Do you know what it means for a person to be empty and filled with hope? I chew on this hope as if it's my last meal and swallow it, but not all. I leave some to find in case my fear swallows me. Now I have nothing to tell you. The war is still itself a war. There is no face to the city or for us. We pass by not knowing us. We walk, our bodies like marionettes. We know very well the value of our bodies. So we leave them in pieces on the paths." End quote. So all of the women's writings I've shared a bit of today will be on a web page devoted specific to them, to be up later this month as a long-term initiative to think through and build with their words as we maintain relationships and correspondence with them, and to engage with what kinds of new communities and formations are being formed amidst and in defiance of Zionist-imposed elimination. Thank you.
Know her already, and her work focuses on the cultural politics of sexuality and feminist and survivor activism around sexual violence. I'd also like to mention that she's the co-author with Heidi Matthews of a recent article which you may have read in Counterpunch magazine entitled "Bombing Gaza Isn't Fighting Sexual Violence." So thank you, Tanya.
I was trying to not show my screen while I look. I'm just wondering, can Rana be in the background while I speak? Sorry.
Yeah.
So should I maybe stand here?
Yeah.
Okay. Just really sorry about this. Okay. All right. Okay, sorry, I thought I still had 7 minutes. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to Kalpana for organizing this, and to the speakers we've already heard from. It's a little bit hard to speak straight after because I'm sure, like many of you, I feel quite overwhelmed, and like I'm still processing a lot of what we've heard. But what I'm going to talk about will follow on particularly from the talk that Aruba gave. I'm going to try to speak quite briefly to leave time for some more conversation, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what Heidi and I tried to write about in our article, which is the way in which feminists in the West have been interpolated in relation to sexual violence and what's happening in Israel and Gaza. So I'm going to start by telling you about a video that was released on the 17th of November by the Israeli government's official Twitter account. This was a fictional video. It was extremely well produced, very high production values. And in this video, a young white woman runs into an office. There's a logo that says Global Police Force. The logo underneath it looks very much like the United Nations logo. It's still up on Twitter. You can find it if you want. And she says, "Can you help me? I've been raped at a music festival." The people behind the desk are all young women. They're all wearing t-shirts that say things like #BelieveWomen or #MeToo. They start to talk to her. And then she mentions that her assailant was speaking in Arabic. And they say, "Wait a minute. Was your assailant Palestinian? And are you Israeli?" And she says, "Yes." And they say, "We can't help you. It's nothing personal. It's just that our bosses upstairs have decided that sexual violence against Israeli women doesn't count." Now, this video was released just before the 16 days of gender-based violence in the UN and just before Israel launched a major campaign attempting, as I said, to interpolate white Western feminists. Now, there's a lot that could be said about that video. One thing that's worth mentioning is in the weeks before the video was released, numerous Israeli officials, including the embassies in France, the USA, and Austria, had accused Palestinians of fictionalizing their suffering and used the hashtag Pallywood to make those allegations. Now, it's since become clear that a lot of the information released by Israel was almost as propagandist around sexual violence, was almost as propagandistic as that video. And the purpose of it, as I say, was to interpolate Western feminists into believing that fighting sexual violence and, the occupation, genocide, and bombing Gaza were, if not exactly the same thing, at least very closely aligned. And this interpolation was even more directly made by Benjamin Netanyahu himself when, at an event that the UN held to talk about sexual violence on October the 7th, he said to feminists of the West, "Where the hell are you?" Now, the coercive nature of that interpolation has always been clear, but we were reminded of it last month when the French Women and Equalities Minister said that any feminist organizations that denied what had happened in terms of sexual violence on October the 7th would be defunded, because that is not what feminism is about in France. So the reason I want to talk about this is because when Kalpana asked me to talk about anti-colonial feminist solidarity, it was clear to me that one of the things that we have witnessed in this conflict is a huge emphasis on producing a colonial feminist solidarity between Israel and Western nations. And I think Kalpana talked about this a little bit, and Aruba also talked about it, but we do have to name it. We have to look at it, and we have to ask how we can test it and build an anti-colonial feminist solidarity that does something quite different. Now, I don't have very long, as I said, and I do want to have discussion, so I just want to focus on, I think, three main aspects of that kind of colonial feminist solidarity. The first is in the video we saw, the fictional Israeli woman who was a victim of sexual violence was being spoken for on behalf of the state. It has been Benjamin Netanyahu, it has been the Israeli Defense Force, it has been representatives of those organizations who have given the stories that they claim come from survivors. To date, there is still no public testimony by survivors of sexual violence. And the organization Israeli Physicians for Human Rights recently, in an interview that was just published yesterday, admitted that in their report on sexual violence, they relied on 12 sources. 11 of those sources were either members of the Israeli military or worked for Israeli government organizations. And so we see here an acceptance when we accept, the hashtag #MeToo unless you're a Jew, or the hashtag Believe Israeli Women that have been put out by the Israeli government, an acceptance that it is the same thing to speak as a feminist in Israel as to speak as Benjamin Netanyahu. And we know this is not the case. Feminists, survivors of violence in Israel, have been fighting and campaigning against this government for a long time because it is a militaristic and misogynist government. And we need, as anti-colonial feminists, to refuse an accommodation with power. There has been too much of a tendency by feminists in international relations, by feminists in governments in the West, to accept that our interests align with the interests of militarism, that in order to fight sexual violence, we need to bring in the army, that when it comes to domestic contacts, in order to fight sexual violence, we need to fund racist police forces. And this is one of the elements of colonial feminism and its appeals to a solidarity that we need to refuse. The second aspect of this is what Jackie Wang describes as a violent claim to innocence that's made by feminists in the West, that we are only ever and automatically on the side of victims. And as Aruba spoke to so powerfully, that is clearly not the case. And in order to build an anti-colonial solidarity, we need to refuse those temptations. The second element, I think, is to question the role that sexual violence has come to play in understandings of feminist politics. In both international politics and domestic, there is an increasingly myopic focus on particularly spectacular accounts of sexual violence that refuse to place it within a context of racial capitalism, within a context of the violence of occupation, within a context of the violence of colonialism. And the irony is that when feminists focus so intensely on single acts of sexual violence, they refuse to see the contexts that create the conditions for that violence to be built and to continue. They refuse to see that everyday sexual violence is a product of situations of occupation and colonization and is what we know Palestinian women live with every day. And in that sense, I think it's important to go beyond contesting the evidence around what happened on October the 7th, because we need to always speak about October the 7th in the broader context of what has happened in Gaza and in Palestine, since 1948 and before. There can be no justice and accountability for any acts of violence in the last 12 months that takes place within an ongoing occupation, that takes place within ongoing conditions of genocide, or accepts a quieter, less immediately spectacular end to Palestinian lives, an end to Palestinian sovereignty. So, Aruba spoke, I think, about the temptation of liberal feminism, the both sides, and that's where I want to end. Israeli advocates have for months argued that feminists should focus on just one thing, that whoever you are, whatever side of the conflict you support, we can agree that rape is wrong. And yes, we can agree that rape is wrong, but a feminism that is anti-colonial should never focus on just one thing. A feminism that is worth its name needs to focus on genocide and colonialism. If we cannot insist that these always are and must be feminist issues, then what is the point of a feminist politics at all? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya, and for saying these really important things, and also, of course, for bringing your talk forward by 7 minutes. So I'm going to now call on Rama Sala Dieng, who is a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh. She's come down from Edinburgh just today. She's also an adjunct senior lecturer at the Mandela School of Public Governance, University of Cape Town, and a member of the Laboratory of Research on Social and Economic Transformations. Dr. Dieng's research focuses on African feminisms, land grabbing, feminist political economy of development and social reproduction, feminist protests, and social movements. Rama is the founding director of the African Feminist Film and Research Festival and curator of Talking Back, African Feminisms in Dialogue. And as some of you may be aware, she recently wrote an article in the Review of African Political Economy explaining why, for her, Palestine is a feminist and anti-colonial issue.
Thank you so much, Kalpana. Thanks, Karen. Thanks to everyone, actually, for being there. And I'm so glad you spoke before me, because I think it makes a good transition. And thanks so much for all our colleagues from Birzeit University. I think what is gathering here today is a nightmare. Tomorrow it will be 5 months. Tomorrow is Thursday, right? 5 months since October 7th. And we thought this genocide would stop. We thought it would not, you know, when all those lawyers and so on said, this is not happening again, because I'm coming from Senegal. The first genocide I heard about, apart from history books, was the genocide in Rwanda. And I heard about it from this book, which is a novel by Senegalese writer Boubacar Boris Diop. And the novel is Muhambi, The Bones of the Books. And he talks about the genocide which took place in 1994, which actually is the latest stage of the genocide, which started centuries before, after Belgian colonization of Rwanda. And after this book, several other African writers visited Rwanda and wrote another testimony on Rwanda. I also read about Jean Asfeld's book, which is titled Machette Season, in French, Une saison de machette. And in this book, I think I was really seized by the fact that he interviewed the killers, the perpetrators of the genocide. In Rwanda, the genocide didn't take place with, you know, firearms and so on. It was machetes. And all of them, mostly, were men. And this shows a dimension about the Rwandan genocide. It is that it was very gendered. And I also read this book by Patricia Daly, Gender and Genocide in Burundi. So why am I saying all this? I felt like an imposter when I was invited to speak today, and I called a friend who's here in this room to ask her, should I come or should I not? Her name is Farwa. Hello, Farwa. And she told me, yes, you have to go, because that's what anti-colonial feminism is about. So Patricia Daly, in her book, she discussed about why we still have this masculinistic vision of genocide. It's because we need to interrogate the concepts of war and peace that are being deployed. We mostly speak of those who engage in war or genocide as men, and those who are the victims of it as being women, victims of sexual violence, victims of, because they have this caring labor that they are producing, women as, reproductive laborers staying in the house, and so on. We have this very dichotomic and gendered definition of genocide, of peace, of war. Women doing the work of bringing pieces back together after everything has been shattered. So what do peace and democracy mean in the context of a genocidal state and genocidal economics with their structural insecurities? So I will now put my feet in it. When I was invited, I received this email from a feminist. Maybe she's in the room. She said, I really hope the speakers address the issue of what the feminist position is on Hamas policies. I wonder what Hamas policies are, and how and why Hamas decided to attack Israel in the particular way it did on October 7th. Hamas is not a very feminist organization, nor is a PA. So this creates a dilemma for talking about the policy problems of the moment, like how to get the ceasefire and bargaining over aid and hostages, not to mention the two or one state solution for Israel-Palestine. I hope this is part of what is discussed at the event. So this speaks directly to what Oruba and you just spoke before me, which is white feminism, white colonial feminism. And I am not sorry to let this person know that I'm not talking about all of this. I'm here to talk about genocide. And where is my position of anti-colonial feminist coming from? And where is this anti-colonial feminist solidarity being expressed from? From genealogies of African anti-colonial global South feminists. This is June Jordan, an American feminist who wrote, Queer Feminist. I was born a black woman, and now I am becoming a Palestinian against the relentless laughter of evil. There is less and less living room, and where are my loved ones? It is time to make our way home. And then I read this blog by Farwa, who is again in the room. She wrote, Palestine changes everything. And this is so true for me. Since the genocide happened, is still going on, I think everything changed for me. As an academic, I define myself as a scholar activist. What does it mean? It means questioning the very structures in which we operate, in which we do our teaching, our learning, everything. What would it mean for me to say I am an anti-colonial feminist and not speak about Palestine in my teaching, and not interrogate the role of my university, the University of Edinburgh, whose one of the most important persons, Lord Balfour, has a direct role in the creation of the state of Palestine. My university is still funding enterprises in Israel. And I am told to just come and do my teaching and go back home. I can't. So, and I also read this article by Mariam Al-Dosari. If you haven't read her work, please do. She talks about how white feminism's selective indignation is an indication to all of us in the global South about what our politics should be. And our politics should be radical, not in the sense, radical in the sense of addressing the root causes of the problem. So Angela Davis told us that the important issues in the Palestine struggle for freedom and self-determination are minimized and rendered invisible by those who try to equate Palestinian resistance to Israeli apartheid with terrorism. And that's just what the email I shared with you was doing. It is distraction. Distraction from the real issues. We are talking about a genocide that is still ongoing. And this person is asking me to talking about, I don't even remember, policies. I don't want to remember. So, if we are saying that we want to abolish the industrial prison complex, we should also say abolish apartheid and end the occupation of Palestine. And this, again, brings you back to the first slide of Audre Lorde. There is no separate issues. You cannot talk about heteropatriarchy and not talk about capitalism. You cannot not talk about genocide if you say you're an anti-colonial feminist. And this title, Justice is Indivisible, Palestine is a Feminist Issue, is a 1997 journal article by Nadia Elia, Palestinian feminist in the diaspora. And she says, and this is why this this conversation we are having is so important. Except Palestine. When we are being told everything is so important except Palestine. And all those important issues, we need to ask who are deciding that they are important? Who are deciding that we should not talk about rape of Palestinian citizens? Because we were told about the 7th of October, but why are we not talking about the rape and sexual violence committed on Palestinian citizens? When reports, evidence is here to testify about it. And again, for the 7th of October, I'm not denying it, but we are still yet to see that type of evidence. So progressive except for Palestine. And this is all, this is what having a radical politics is about. It's about making linkages between subjects that we are being told are separate. Palestine is a feminist issue, is a reproductive justice issue, is an agrarian justice issue, is a reproductive justice issue, is an environmental justice issue, is an ethical issue. So we cannot just separate those issues. We have to address them all together if we want for Palestine to be free. And Palestine is already free. If we want to free Palestine. And I'm talking in solidarity with Françoise Vergès, who said that women in the Global South have always been present in the front line of feminist fights. Yes, yet their voices are never being heard. And there are those white feminists who, again, come and tell us, why is it not reciprocal? Why are we not talking about anti-colonial, reciprocal feminist solidarity? Because we are not waiting for it to be reciprocal. Our conditions of existence and our conditions of liberation are tied together. So we cannot be there discussing the terms of our solidarity. Our solidarity is unconditional. And on the 3rd of November, we organized, there is a collective called South Feminist Futures, organized a talk to reclaim Palestine, sorry, I'm just so exhausted, to reclaim solidarity with Palestine. And I'm not sure if you were able to read this report, this statement by the reproductive, by the Palestinian Solidarity Collective. If you have not, I will just read an excerpt. Because I wanted to talk about the importance of decentering social reproduction. My research is on social reproduction. And it has to do with everything that Oruba said before. In the context of Gaza, reproductive genocide includes the control and cutting off of vital life-giving sources such as water, fuel, electricity, and food. This is the starvation we are seeing. The denial of life-giving and life-saving medical resources, collective starvation, the murder of elderly men and elderly women, the eradication of entire generations, the mass murder of women, the mass murder of children, the mass murder of babies, the murder of pregnant women, the obliteration of medical institutions, the mass execution of vulnerable civilians, such as those seeking shelter, the assault on dignity and life, the separation of families, mass detention, incarceration, and torture of men and women and children, mass destruction of schools, mass destruction of places of worship, mass destruction of homes and residential spaces, mass destruction of shelters and for vulnerable communities, the mass destruction of cemeteries, the annihilation of environment. When you're seeing them use white phosphorus on people and on livelihoods, this tells you something, that the goal is to render impossible the reproduction of life, the production and the reproduction of the means of production, the destruction of vital food infrastructure, mass exposure to life-threatening toxic waste, unsanitary conditions, the illegal use of chemical weapons on civilians, especially those in captivity, environmental degradation resulting in infertility, prolonged conditions of collective captivity, including besiegement, collective starvation, prolonged endangerment of women, children, and babies. Palestine is a reproductive justice issue, and I'm repeating this for those of us who wasn't clear about it. And what attending this talk did for me was it made it clear that Palestine changes everything about my politics, about my ethics, about what I teach, about how I teach it, about who I choose to be in community with, about who is not worth my time, about what is not worth my time, and about what I need to spend the rest of my life doing. Being in solidarity, but really practicing it as an active verb. Solidarity is not just something you declare, it is not just rhetorical. You have to embody it, you have to take risks. And when you see, for instance, Professor Jairo Funes, who has been dismissed by his university because he took a step and expressed his solidarity, it tells you something. We can be replaced. Tomorrow, our institutions can replace us. But if you were asking yourselves, what would you have been doing during the Second War or in times of occupation and so on, this is the moment, this is now. What are you doing every day? Are you boycotting? What are you teaching your students if you're a teacher? If you're saying you're a scholar activist, what are your politics? How are you embodying it? And you cannot say you are a feminist while supporting gender violence, settler colonialism, indigenous dispossession, and apartheid. So this woman, academic, wrote to me, very senior actually. I chose not to spend my time explaining anything to her because she knows. She knows. And what she was trying to do is distraction, and it's not worth my time. I prefer to be there in solidarity with Oruba, Rema, and all of those who deserve our time. And then we are in the very structure of the white university, and we need to be very clear and very intentional about what this anti-colonial solidarity means. How we are developing counter-narratives to the white epistemological power. And finally, it's not about giving voice. And I think the title was so well chosen. It's about amplifying. There is nobody who doesn't have a voice. When I hear that expression, giving voice to the voiceless, there is no voiceless person. There are people who are deliberately silenced and whose voices are deliberately erased. So we are not giving voice, we are amplifying. How do we amplify? And I can share the source of this. We use correct terminologies. We're not talking about war, we're not talking about conflict, we're not talking about clash. It's a genocide. It's settler colonialism. It's ethnic cleansing. It's illegal settlements, and we need to end it. Not only are we asking for ceasefire, we're also asking for justice, because all this cannot go unpunished. Do not allow news titles to manipulate the actual situation. You need to stay educated. Don't say, oh, I don't know about the issue. Oh, it's so far from me. No. The information is right there. I don't know who was, Oruba was saying, it is the first televised genocide. The information, if you want it, is here, or you have to seek it. But you have to do your own research, and you have to stay educated. We need to stop the censorship of Palestinian content. We need to join a BDS or any other abolitionist movement. If you are here at Birkbeck, investigate. Sorry, I hope this won't mean that you won't invite me again. But do your investigation. Try and see if Birkbeck has invested in some Israeli, enterprises. Call for divestment, call for sanctions. Follow credible sources. There are less and less voices from Palestine, but do your work. And then Except Palestine is coming to Edinburgh. Thanks to those who invited me, we are organizing one in Edinburgh on the 19th of April. And you are all welcome to join us. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for that. Thank you for that great speech, Rama, and all the really important points. And yeah, for those of you who are here at Birkbeck, do come and talk to me, because finding out where Birkbeck's investments are is precisely what's going on at the moment, although they're particularly good at hiding them. So we were meant to finish this at 5, but we're hoping that we can continue a bit longer. We're here, and I know many of you will have questions for the speakers. So if you can stay, please stay. I'm going to just ask Rama and Tanya to come back to the stage, and I'm going to bring up our speakers from Birzeit. So please, yeah, that's great. And I'm just going to try and show you the audience as well. If you just bear with me for a second.
I'm very interested in your ideas around anti-colonialism, and I've been watching the news about what's going on in Palestine as well, and I have complete solidarity with the women of Palestine. As someone who's watched my mother suffer with mental ill health, I can't imagine what those women are going through right now, especially with what's happening, trying to look after their children. I'm wondering about the children that are in this awful situation. In establishing an anti-colonial feminist solidarity, one person comes out, how do we have to redefine these ideas which such as Frantz Fanon, who believes that the condition of the colonized and the colonizer is one that is of a liberating experience for the colonized. And I also believe that we have to de-Americanize the whole feminist movement as well, because much of the white feminist movement is from America. How would you reconcile that idea with the works of Kimberly Crenshaw's Intersectionality and Andrea Lord, who are African American women?
Okay,
who suffered from the American racism and
yeah, if you could just keep it.
Okay, yeah. I also believe that it's also, we find that in common with other historically settler nations such as Australia, New Zealand, Latin America, the Caribbean, apartheid South Africa. How would you be able to rebuild the global feminism against the historic origins of feminism as a white liberal idea?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gillian. I'm a student here. Thank you very much for the panel. Thank you for the people from Gaza. I send my solidarity and my gratitude for the work that you are doing. My investment is various. I am of Congolese ancestry, so I have obviously some vested interest, if I can call that, in genocide and genocidal histories. My question is really whether we are, despite what we are claiming, not exceptionalizing Gaza. And I'm going to speak from a few premises that I've noted as we have been speaking and discussing today. So we know, for example, that there is a tendency towards minimizing intra-group violence when there is a greater enemy from outside. That's what we do as women. We try to protect violence, gendered violence that come from our men, quote unquote. So we tend to do that. We have the data that shows that we tend to do that. We know that horizontal violence that can be perpetrated towards women is more acute when the group is more brutalized. So I'd say that women from Gaza, because of that, is more at risk. And we know that the distinction between the pre and the post-colony is largely an illusion. So I am wondering, and again, because of my ancestry, and I know that some of the issues that we see in Congo, which is also a continuation of the Rwanda genocide, we've seen the use of child soldier that was implemented through the colony, and we've seen the mutilation of Congolese women who started under the colony. So I guess I am wondering whether we are sufficiently learning from the violence. Some of it actually is hidden, that is happening in Gaza. Perhaps some of it is hidden because there is an element of that protection that I'm talking about that is likely, because that's what history is teaching us, to continue post-colony. That is my question. Thank you.
We'd like to take one more question, I think, because we've only had two so far. I think you had a question. Yes? Just pass it back.
Thank you very much. My name is Ece. I'm a lecturer in Open University. These were amazing talks. My question is to Rama. You mentioned about the genocide is being still masculinistic. Imperialist armies are increasingly getting gender equal in the UK and also US Army. We see that in Middle East. But I think there is something specific in Israel that we haven't experienced before. It is purely gender equal. Like it's a mandatory army. Women, men have to join. And when you walk on the streets of Tel Aviv, you see female generals passing, women carrying army guns. So I think Aruba said something about sisterhood. And what happened, what's happening in this genocide, the gender equal character of this genocide is totally puzzling me. And I really question everything I know about feminism. So I'd like to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Just behind you. And then we'll get out.
Hi everyone, thank you for the speakers. It's such an eye-opening talk. My name is Lina and I'm a student here. I'm doing human geography. And my question is for Rama, Tanya, and Aruba, because a lot of what you said resonated with me. I'm from Sudan, and my question is, how can we build active, and when I say active, I mean practical and proactive, not only anti-colonial, but also anti-imperialist feminist solidarity? Because a lot of what Aruba said about rape being weaponized by IDF to displace people out of their homes is being now used in Sudan by the RSF. it's effectively being used to terrorize women, to displace them, and also to emasculate men and humiliate them when they are from different ethnic tribes. And not to mention, RSF is also funded and legitimized by Israel through their foreign policy and through the Mossad, and also funded by the UAE, which I think is a modern-day imperial state. So how can we forge a feminism that can accommodate and truly bring a new sense of sisterhood and connection between all of these experiences? Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for those questions. Can I just check if Rania, Rema, and Oruba were able to hear those questions? Yeah?
More or less.
Okay, more or less. Okay, so essentially, and forgive me if I'm leaving things out, but essentially we've had questions about the drawing on the experience of the war on Congo. Is there, is there this pressure on women to not talk about gender violence that they're experiencing in their communities in a situation of war, right? That's essentially your question. Then there was a question about I'm sorry, I'm just summarizing. Then there was a question about the kind of Israeli army and the military and the way it's been kind of made gender equal and what the implications of that are. And then there was the question about Sudan and its relation where Israel is actually funding the militarized forces there, and how we really build a solidarity which is not only anti-colonial but anti-imperialist. So I'll just hand those over to first to the online speakers and then to our in-person speakers.
I'd really like to answer the question about internal violence, internal gender-based violence. That's the basis of my chapter in the book that just came out, co-edited with my colleagues Laila, Roberta, and Nadra. This claim is a really major one that is made in all of these international frameworks about gender violence in war, right? One part is about sexual violence used as a weapon of war, and the other is that when you have armed conflict, you also have more internal violence against women. And this kind of narrative has a very particular and long and extremely problematic life in terms of international humanitarians and their approach to Gaza since the siege and sanctions over the last 15 years. And in fact, when you look at the data, in fact, in the middle of these kinds of situations, the last thing that happens is that there's internal violence by men against women. Everybody has to work together. Everybody has to survive, right? There's arguments and quarrels. And the thing you need to know in terms of the kinds of statistics these international frameworks develop about brown people in the third world is that arguments, right, and fights are counted as violence against women, right? And in these situations, under so much terror and pressure, you're definitely going to get arguments between men and women. 2014 war, Spanish researchers did a survey immediately after the war to confirm that domestic violence rose during the 2000 war on Gaza. And what they found was exactly the opposite. So I'm not saying that internal gender-based violence doesn't exist in Gaza, but during wars, forget it. We've already got enough violence. In fact, what everybody works to do is to try and keep violence out of whatever space they have left, right? Including men. And the other sort of point I wanted to make, I mean, Ruba, I agree with so much of your analysis, but one point that I really disagree with is this notion that colonized men are more likely to use sexual violence, right? Take a look at the Japanese in World War II and what they did to Korean women. They weren't colonized. Take a look at what the Russian military did to German women, right? In the aftermath of World War II. I mean, you had mass rape in both cases. Take a look at the American military in Vietnam. You want to call the white American military a colonized army? It's something that militaries do everywhere. And it is not something particular to brown colonized men.
I'm sorry, I need to correct this point. I would normally never interrupt, but I do need to interrupt because that is a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of what I said. And so because I'm a Black woman that does this kind of work, that speaks to kind of the colonial construction and formation of Black and brown men, I do need to say that is not what I meant. So I want to correct that, sorry.
Sorry, I was actually saying that Aruba said that, not you. Okay, so Aruba can come back and say to me she didn't say it. And just sort of one final point. The gentleman who was talking about the loss of the person he worked with in Gaza, and okay, I understand a kind of feminist sensibility. At the same time, I deeply respect that he wanted to mark the loss of people that he knew and worked with in Gaza. And in the context of somewhere like the UK, he probably doesn't have people from Gaza to mark that loss with. So with all due respect to a kind of feminist sensibility, I was very, very moved by him bringing the name and the story of his colleague that was lost in Gaza. Thank you.
Thanks, Rina. Would anyone else on the panel like to respond before we move on to Rama and Tanya for their responses? Shall I bring you in? Rama, I think
Well, actually, I was wondering if I could give my time to the speakers from Gaza if they wanted to speak. Rania, is there anything you wanted to say? Or Oruba?
Rania, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think it was very difficult to hear the questions, unfortunately.
Okay. Do you want to kind of comment on the question about the fact that the Israeli military now claims to be gender equal, and there's an unprecedented presence of women in the, they're publicizing the fact that women are in the front line, and this is being portrayed as a kind of a feminist gain. Is that something either of you would like to comment?
Dania, if you don't want to answer it, I will. Yeah, so the Israelis keep counting the fact that 18% of their soldiers on the ground are in Gaza. I think you might have seen some of the selfies put out by women of the IDF. And I think the point is, it's not just the women soldiers on the ground who are doing what the boys do, which we've seen in multiple other wars. Abu Ghraib, Iraq, right? Yeah. So it's not something exceptional. And the genocidal calls by Israeli women on Gaza is also not exceptional. You just have to take a look at the BJP in India. You just have to take a look at right-wing, ethnically identified movements anywhere in the world. And, you know, for feminists, this has always been sort of a problem, right? Or for a particular type of feminism that I believe that we are better than men, right? But women also, you know, are part of their national communities and part of right-wing ideologies. So, you know, and they can also often be the biggest cheerleaders. The vast majority of right-wing Israelis who are at the Kerem Shalom checkpoint stopping aid going into Gaza are women.
Thank you, Rima. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to ask both our in-person speakers as well as all of you online to just share some final thoughts at the end of what I think has been a really very important and inspiring event.
Thank you so much. I want to salute Guylaine. Salut. I read your book. Guylaine is so inspirational. If you haven't read her book, Living While Black, do read it. I recommend strongly. And also your question, I wasn't saying that it was more masculinist, just that the media lens, you know, the gaze is still very gendered, you know, but of course Israel is claiming that it is very gender equitable in its massacre. So I wouldn't respond to that. And thank you so much for really reminding us that it's important to hold all genocides together and not just establish a sort of hierarchy or, you know, of those situations. So whether we talk about Sudan, what's happening right now in Haiti, the DRC, we express our solidarity with all those liberation struggles together. There is no, and that's what anti-imperialism is about, anti-colonial feminism as well, is to really bear witness. And that's the reason why the person who was speaking with the picture, also, I was really moved. And I think it is also one of the things we need to do, to hold space and to also bear witness and allow for these moments of sharing. And yes, thank the organizers for involving me. I would have loved to hear Karen's about Karen's findings in a recent journal article on the children of Gaza, but I'm sure there will be more opportunities.
Yes, just quickly, I want to thank the speakers again. And I suppose on that question of the Israeli military, I think it is really important that we distinguish between kind of equal opportunities for women. I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about here as well is the Israeli soldiers flying the rainbow flag over the ruins of Gaza. And, you know, this is not a queer politics, it's not a feminist politics. And
Pinkwashing.
Yes, the pinkwashing, as well as, you know, Israel's claims that its army is a feminist army. A genocidal army is not a feminist army, no matter how many women participate in the violence that it enacts. And, you know, and I think that is why we do need to think about different feminist formations, and that there are, you know, projects that are explicitly nationalist, militaristic, genocidal, that claim the label of feminism, and that's something that, you know, we have to counter and refuse. And I think, you know, that's been what's been so amazing about today and the brilliant speakers we've had. And thank you again.
Can I just ask Aruba, Rania, and Rima to just leave us with any thoughts you might want to leave us with at the end of this event today?
I've said more than enough, so I will leave it to my colleagues.
I think Aya is. Aya, are you able to translate for Aruba if need be?
Yes, if she'd like to say something.
Okay.
Aruba, you need to unmute.
آسفة. تمام. كنت فقط يعني أود الحديث بالنهاية إنه للتفكير بأي نسوية مناهضة للاستعمار، أفكر في إنه يجب التخفف قليلا من الجوانب الرومانسية، بمعنى إنه أكيد هناك جوانب تقاطعية ما بيننا وبين سياقات أخرى، يعني مثل هايتي وكونغو والسودان. النساء حاليا يعانين منها من الاغتصاب والاعتداء الجنسي وغيرها من هذه الممارسات، لكن هناك كذلك اختلافات يعني كبيرة ما بين هذه السياقات، وفهم خصوصية المنطقة هو جزء أساسي من محاولة التفكير في كيف لنا أن نفكر في نسوية عابرة للجغرافيا والزمن أن تكون مناهضة للاستعمار، لأنه أي حديث لا يأخذ هذه الاختلافات، ليس الاختلافات فقط يعني ما بين السياقات، حتى في السياق الفلسطيني نفسه هناك اختلافات في مواقع الخطر الذي يعيشه النساء حتى في قطاع فيما يتعلق بالطبقة، الاختلافات المهنية والتعليمية وغيرها. يعني أعتقد فهم هذا الاختلاف والنقاش حوله هو جزء أساسي من محاولة تطوير ممارسات ونظريات خارج يعني السياق الجامعي. تفضلي آية مشان أقدر أكمل.
So Aruba is talking about that any kind of feminism, the anti-colonial feminism, has to part with romantic ideas of universal feminism. So each country and each of the women we mentioned in contexts like in Sudan, Haiti, or other places live in particular places or particular contexts and historical context. And so despite sharing some similarities, there are differences that we have to pay attention to the particularities of a certain area or place as part of thinking about a transnational or atemporal feminism. And even for Palestinian women themselves, there are differences between them. So whether we're talking about class, about education, understanding these differences is crucial when we discuss we discuss the practices we want to develop, the practices we want to embrace to adopt a transnational atemporal feminism. So the particularities of the context are very important. We have to pay attention.
يعني أريد أن أختم بشيء صغير بأنه هناك كثير من النساء من هن نسويات لكن من غير نظريات، يعني بدون استيعابهم العديد من المفاهيم والنظريات التي نلوكها لسنوات طويلة في الجامعات في المؤسسات وفي المعاهد. وهذا الشيء يمكن أن نلاحظه من الحياة اليومية للنساء وسط الإبادة واليقين، كيف حاولوا بطرق بسيطة أن يعيدوا إنتاج الحياة من قلب الإبادة لكي تكون شكل من أشكال مقاومة الإبادة، وقد يكون في لديهم إحساس بالمستقبل من قلب بنية الإبادة تسعى إلى القضاء على المستقبل. فأعتقد في اللحظة التي نفهم بها بأن هناك كثير من النساء ربما لا يمتلكن اللغة المناسبة، لا يمتلكن الأدوات التي يعني نعتاد عليها في الجامعات، لكن في مسار حركتهم اليومية وفي حياتهم اليومية وفي التنقل من مكان إلى آخر. نعلم اليوم بأنه النساء في قطاع غزة طبعا قضية الشعب ينزحون بشكل حركي ودائري مستمر من مكان إلى آخر، وفي كل مكان يحاولوا أن يخلقوا أشكال أخرى من التأقلم ومن التكيف، يعني دون أن يترجموها إلى كلمات وإلى مفاهيم حقيقية. فأعتقد أنه جزء أساسي كمان يقع على عاتقنا بأنه ليس دوما نتحدث بالنيابة عنهم، وكأنه هذا كمان فعل من أفعال يعني سرقة اللسان منهم. فأنا يعني أطمح بشكل أو بآخر بأن تكون اللقاءات القادمة تستضيف نساء من غزة يعشن الإبادة، يتحدثن عن تجاربهن كذلك، لأنه أعتقد مما يعيشونه نستطيع يعني أن نفكر في كيف لنا أن نخلق نوع من تقاطعيات أو تضامنيات ما بين النساء حول العالم لتفكيك كل هذه النظم الأيديولوجية والعنصرية، آخذين بعين
Quickly, what Aruba says is that we also have to pay attention that there are a lot of women who are feminists without the language of feminism that we use to speak about this. And so without the words and the jargon of academia, they are the women who, from their daily lives and amidst the rubble and the genocide, have tried to produce life again and to fight against genocide. And these women, with their simple tools and adapting all the time to the realities they're living, without translating the practices they do into academic concepts. For us, what Aruba hopes is that in future meetings that we can talk to the women of Gaza who are living this genocide so they can speak for themselves instead of us speaking for them, because that's not what we're trying to do. Yeah, and that's the way for us to listen to them, to hear from them, so we can have solidarities and we can have intersectionalities that are inspired by what they do.
Sure, I'll just speak briefly. Aruba said a little bit what I was going to say. So, you know, I had received a testimonial from a woman the other day where she's saying, you know, her family returned back to her house that was bombed, and you know, she had found the library that she had built over the years with money that she was working with, and all her books were destroyed. And this notion of spending the majority of what she earned on books, with this knowledge, or with this understanding that knowledge is liberatory, and knowledge can is to serve the struggle, and saying that, you know, all that knowledge did not stop this genocide, did not save a child from being killed. And so it just, to kind of bring back this question in terms of, or you know, following also from Aruba, what Aruba was saying is that, you know, it's what we do with this knowledge, it's what we do with these words. And so the production of this genocide is clearly not Israel alone. You know, so we do have this larger anti-imperial, anti-colonial feminist kind of movement to build, and part of that building is dismantling and clearly taking apart. So, you know, from the positionalities that we're in, and what some of you spoke to, in terms of working to dismantle those elements that work to produce and allow this moment to happen.
Thank you, Rania. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to Oruba, Rania, and Rima for joining us today. So and I'd also like to thank Rama and Tanya for joining us. And I hope you'll keep in touch with us. We'll be in touch with you if you've signed up. I'm just going to share on the screen the call for the global strike on Friday the 8th. So I hope that we'll all find ways to join that. Thank you, everyone.